And turns out there's some changes, short-term changes or regulations ongoing that Weldon wanted to talk about. So that's why we're here. And Weldon, you've got the floor.
Okay, thank you, Norm. Hey, good morning. Before we get started, let's take a moment to introduce folks. So I'll start off. I'm Weldon Langley. I'm the director of the Division of Watershed Management at Mass DEP. And I've met with you all, just a few weeks ago on the regulation revisions that we have now out to public comment on nitrogen sensitive areas and watershed permitting. And this program, the Water Management Program, now also has regulations out for public comment. And this is also one of the programs, under my supervision at Mass DEP. So with that, I'll turn it over to my supervisor, Kathy Baskin, to say hello.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here today. I'm sorry I will have to leave about 9 o'clock, but I am interested in hearing from you. And I encourage you to submit comments on our proposed regulations to impose certain restrictions during droughts on Water Management Act registrations. Comments are due on November 18th, and we definitely welcome them. I'm sure we can put the links in the chat for you as we're speaking. They're fairly straightforward, you'll hear, and it's basically turn off the lawn sprinkler when there's a drought, or turn it off gradually over the condition of the drought. So hopefully you'll send in some comments. And I will turn it over to Beth McCann, who works in the Water Management Act program and is an essential key player. So good morning, Beth.
Morning. Yes, my name is Beth McCann. I work with the Water Management Program in Boston, and I'm happy to explain any questions you might have about our proposed regulations or about the program in general, either now or you can contact me after the meeting. These regulatory changes, I think Weldon's going to give more of a presentation, but the idea is that during times of drought, when they're declared by the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, we would like to see people who are registered with our program cut back on non-essential outdoor water use, which pretty much means lawn watering. Any agricultural or business function, core business function, would be exempt from the provisions. But anyway, Weldon will give more of a presentation, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions.
Thank you. And before you get started, Weldon, I'll just make one comment. At least from my personal point of view, I know that in town Marion we have water regulations we impose every summer, and I have to admit my ignorance of the fact that the state had regulations above and beyond what we were doing. That's what sort of prompted us to to try to get somebody to talk to us about what's going on, because I think a lot of people didn't realize that. So I appreciate whatever you got to say.
So let me just do a couple of housekeeping things first. So Kathy mentioned that the regulations are due, comments for our proposal are due on November 18th. That has changed since I first spoke to Elizabeth. When Elizabeth and I first spoke about setting up this meeting, those regulations comment period was to close on the 7th, which is Monday. And then over the course of this week, we received some requests for extensions on the public comment period, and we've granted those. So the comment period now closes on November 18th.
Oh,
okay. I've also abbreviated a presentation that we gave at the public hearing recently. And the manager of the Water Management Program, Dwayne Levangie, is away this week. So I've abbreviated his presentation really in the interest of time, because with only an hour today, I wanted to make sure that that you all had time for questions, particularly if you're not as familiar with the Water Management Program as as others who were involved in the public hearing. So I do have an abbreviated presentation. So if you want to see the full presentation, then I recommend that you go to our website. There's going to be links to that website that'll be shown later in the presentation. There you can see the full presentation. And also we have recordings of the 2 public hearings that were held last week. So, and maybe week before, I think, as well. So that would give you even more detail and more information if you chose to do that. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and show you this abbreviated presentation. Come on.
Am I doing something wrong?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just wasn't giving me the choice that I expected. So let me try that again.
There you
Right.
Right.
You're seeing the presentation. Let me see if I can
Yes.
get into slide share mode or slide presentation mode. Dwayne was having the same problem with this particular presentation, and I adapted his. So
Are you trying to
I'm
change
trying-
to the next, to advance? to the
no, I'm
next?
trying to get it into this the slide show mode.
It is, it's good. It's good.
Oh, it
So
is for
we
you?
just see that title slide and that is all.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Then
Yeah.
for me, it's looking like it's still in the, I can see all the slides over to the left. So anyway, I will
I
advance.
wonder if you can advance it. That's where he was having a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Did you see it advance?
No.
No.
How about now?
Nope.
No.
All
May have
hang
to
on, let me try
end it
something.
and come
Let me
back.
try try it again. So.
I posted a link in the chat. So
Anyway.
everything that you would be interested in seeing with respect to the regulation package should be able to be found there. Our notice of when the comment period closes. There's the red line version of the regulations, the clean copy of the regulations. There is a notice to reviewers asking for comments on one particular item that's in the regulations. So you should be able to find everything there.
Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes,
Yes.
we're seeing not the presentation mode, but the setup.
Okay. And are you seeing this slide that's titled registration history?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sorry. It looks like we're going to have to do it in this way because there's something cranky about this file.
So we're flexible.
Yeah. Okay. But as long as you can see it and I can talk you through it. So I think there's, one thing that you should know before we get started, because this group is not that familiar with Water Management Act, that there are essentially 2 classes of regulated entities under it. The first were registrants. Those were people who were using water at the time of the Act's enactment. And they were allowed to document that average water use from the period, was it 85 through 89, Beth?
81 to 85.
81, sorry, right, 81 to 85. And then to be able to continue to use that water under the registered volume. Then for any additional sources, any new sources by, say, a party who wasn't a registrant, or increases above the threshold volume were required to gain a permit. And so a lot of the presentation today is going to talk about registrants. And so what we're really talking about is that class who were already using water during the period 81 through 85 and registered their water use with the department. Okay. Initially, when we registered these folks for their water use, there were only 3 conditions in the registration: that they meter all their withdrawals, that they calibrate those meters on a regular basis, and that they maintain records and report the withdrawal data to us on an annual basis. In more recent registration renewals, in 2008, we also included a conservation performance standard of 65 gallons per person per day and a 10% unaccounted for water use to help with summer demand management provisions. These conditions of our registrations that we in place during that 2008 renewal period were appealed. That appeal went to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, who found in the Fairhaven case that the department had the authority to condition registrations, but only after having duly promulgated regulations. So the purpose of our regulatory revision proposal is, in fact, to promulgate regulations that would help to conserve water during times of drought declared by the Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. We've had a couple of other things happen. The Permit Extension Act, as a result of the recession that occurred, in the 2008 to 2010 sort of time frame, delayed some folks' ability to, sort of take on their projects. And then, of course, we had COVID. And so both of those things resulted in executive orders from the governor who extended the permit timeframes of the permits. And that will be relevant to you later on in the show. Okay, did you see the slide advance?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good, thanks. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in this slide. What I want you to notice primarily is that, over 70% of the registrants, or of water users, I should say, under the Water Management Act, are public water supply systems. So they are certainly the majority of the people who are using water and who are, and because it's a public water supply system, really have the most discretionary water use. And so that's why this provision is really targeted towards that discretionary water use. And as Beth said, some of these other industries, such as agriculture, cranberry growing, golf, because golf, maintaining their greens and tees is really kind of an essential water use. If they can't maintain those, they would lose business. Other businesses that have, essential water use for essential services in their business are identified in the regulation as being exempt from that for their non-essential, as essential water use for the core of their business.
Leon, how do you
Yes.
track these businesses? Is there some way you track each of these businesses?
Yes, so they are, they're either registered or permitted or both with us, and that they also have to, as I said in the previous slide, they would meter their water usage and report those to us. For the cranberry industry, there is kind of an alternative way. We base it on their acreage that is irrigated, as opposed to metering, because metering for their particular circumstance is difficult. So we go by it. We have a formulation for acreage irrigation.
Do they volunteer to be part of this program? I'm just
They're
thinking
required by law. They're required by
Okay.
law to be part of this program.
Yeah, it just
and so
seems
the
like
water-
87 golf courses, and that seems a little low compared to for water usage. So I was just wondering if is the program.
Yeah. So one of the things
can
to
I
keep
speak
in
to that?
mind is, sorry, go ahead, Beth.
The threshold for regulation under the Water Management Act is 100,000 gallons per day. And so really that comes out to be 18-hole golf courses. Smaller golf courses we typically do not regulate.
And having evaluated those, we find that their water use is under the threshold. So I meant to mention that 100,000 gallons per day on average is the threshold under the Water Management Act. So this is really targeted at large water users. And it's also some important aspects of this is, that much of the water supply regulation in the state is aimed at protecting the public and ensuring, safe drinking water. The Water Management Act is uniquely aimed at not only protecting the ability of water users to withdraw, but also it assesses the potential for impacts on other water users or other water users' impact on those registered or permitted users. And it also has provisions that require us to balance the environmental consequences of large-scale water withdrawals with the need for water for, business and potable purposes. So that's somewhat unique, and not only to this law, but to some degree in Massachusetts. So I'm going to move.
Joe, could I ask a question? Where would companies like landscaping companies or pool companies or whatever, would that fall under any of this?
So if they were withdrawing from a source on their own site and it exceeded the threshold volume, then they would be subject. Now, landscape companies may get water from a variety of sources. So I don't know that we have any landscape companies that are registered or permitted, right, Beth?
We don't.
Yeah.
Usually the landscape companies, they might occasionally take water from a source, but more typically they take it from the municipal supplies, and it's the municipal supplier who's regulated.
Yeah, and many of their customers would simply have, underground irrigation systems in place that they would use for the watering, and landscape services would maintain the grounds.
So if they were, if they were retrieving or stopping by a river or something, that would not be allowed under this. Is that correct?
That would be less than 100,000 gallons per day, over 90 days or more. So it wouldn't meet our threshold. Leldon can speak more to the wetlands regulations, possibly. I don't know those well enough to really speak to that.
Yeah, so there's, the wetlands question is really a complicated one. There are really two provisions under the wetlands regs that I think apply. One is that, as you know, Elizabeth, that the wetlands law applies to any activity that will remove, fill, dredge, or alter any areas subject to protection under the Act, right? Okay. And if you look at the provision of the definition of what constitutes an alteration, if you look at the two definitions for activity and alteration, then you could conclude that if it's altering the water level would be subject to the Act. If you throw a hose in the water, fill a truck, the question is, well, whether is that an activity that will alter? And that's really a question for a conservation commission. So I think that's the simplest way to kind of explain that regulatory authority. But as Beth noted, it's really not something that is typically triggered under the Water Management Act.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, moving along. So in these proposed regs, we have two definitions that we're proposing to amend. One is, or not amend, but insert. One is multi-year drought storage, and the other is this non-essential outdoor water use, which I've spoken to briefly. Then we have a provision that talks about what the registration conditions would be. And we have, we're going to talk in more detail about that one. The effective dates and expiration dates for permitting by water source are proposed for amendments. That's because the original regulations set up a 20-year basin cycle in which the water management program would review and renew permits. And as I mentioned before, registrations are due for renewal every 10 years. So when the Permit Extension Act executive order and the COVID extension orders were issued, that sort of resulted in the department's expiration dates of its, of its permitting schedule being kind of out of whack. And so we ended up, revising and proposing a schedule so that we would have the ability to review all permits on a, in a basin at the same time to be able to better evaluate impacts on the environment and impacts on other water users. And then we have a provision on orders, violations, and penalties that are proposed for revision. So what's important here is for you to know that we interact quite a bit with some other agencies. The Department of Conservation and Recreation calculates what water needs forecasts are for municipalities who have public water supply systems. And we are also a part of the Water Resources Commission, which is a state body that sets water policy. And under the Water Resources Commission, they have adopted the state's drought management plan, which was revised in, I want to say 2018, 2019, something about that.
2019.
2019, yeah. And so in those revisions or updates to that policy, the state drought plan adopted these levels for the drought. And level 1 is a mild drought in which non-essential outdoor water use restrictions are for 1 day per week watering before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. Level 2 is a significant drought and requires that only handheld hoses or watering cans be used before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. Level 3 is a critical drought, and that and level 4, the emergency level, both ban all non-essential outdoor water use. So this definition of non-essential outdoor water use is an important one because it does, relieve certain registrants of the requirements under this drought plan. Norma, you going to ask a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, did we get? I think we were at a level 3. Is that as high as we got this year?
Yes.
I believe that's right. Yeah, it did
Okay.
vary a bit from in different parts of the state. And one of the things about the drought plan is, they're looking at them. They're looking at the regional aspects of it. So portions of regions of the state differ in terms of when a drought occurs and its duration. Okay.
Thanks.
So you should also just know that permitted entities under the Water Management Act all have some form of water conservation in their permits. Okay, they vary a bit over time. They've varied a bit, but they do have they do have water conservation requirements. And the issue here is that registrants do not currently have those requirements on curbing non-essential outdoor water use during. And it was that lawsuit that went to the SJC that is causing the department to now propose that so that we would have.
We lost him.
Well, I can't pick up with the presentation, but I can pick up at least briefly on the.
I'll text.
Oh,
Let's see. Did he's gone altogether, it looks like.
Yeah.
Permits under the Water Management Act have conservation requirements.
Did
Is he
you
back?
lose me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm back. And you've
Okay,
lost the
good.
presentation too, right?
Yeah, but that's great. You are able to come back.
Yeah, oh boy. You gotta love the Zoom world, don't you?
I'm
never
going to
happened to
have
me
to
when I did
excuse
live.
myself, but
thank you.
yeah, very nice to meet all of you and really appreciate your interest in the Water Management Act. So have a great day.
Bye, Kathy.
You too. Thanks.
Well,
While we have a
while the-
second, I was just wondering, because I missed the meeting in September and I'm kicking myself for it. Where exactly are the presentations that were provided for these?
They're on our
present-
website, and I'm sorry, go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, the presentations that were given at the public hearings on these regulations are on the website, as are recordings of both the public hearings we held at the end of October.
And what's the address for that website?
I
It's just,
think Kathy put it into the chat.
In the chat, Sam.
So permits for new water use do include a lot of conservation. I'll just kind of go through where some of the stuff Weldon was talking about. They've got some very specific requirements. They require outdoor water use restrictions on non-essential use. In many cases throughout the summer, suppliers have a choice. They can do it from May 1st to September 30th, restrict water use to 1 or 2 days a week. And then it goes down to 1 day a week when we hit a low flow trigger. This that we're proposing for registrants, their use has not increased since 1985. A lot of them are older urban areas. So there's some arguments to say that they're really not doing any harm to the environment that hasn't been a very long standing. But during droughts, we're taking the position that it really makes sense to cut back on non-essential outdoor water use. And so this would only be during times of droughts for registrants, which is somewhat different from what's in the permits. Just kind of that's background on it. And I think that's where you were, Leldon.
I think so, Beth. And I'm for some reason you're still seeing just the cover
Indeed.
slide, right?
Yes.
And does anybody have any questions about the program or the act that I might answer while Leldon's?
No, it's like I mentioned earlier, it was my own ignorance. I didn't realize there was the program.
Well, we've been here.
Yeah.
And I tried to check on the town of Marion as we were first speaking to figure out exactly what your status is with the Water Management Act. And I have to admit, I don't know offhand. But I believe Marion is registered. I don't think you have a permit, which might be part of the reason the program really would not have affected the water workings of Marion, because you just required to report. But I do know you are in our regulated community and report annually to us.
Thank you.
Now, are you seeing the non-essential water use slide yet?
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. I'm not going to read this whole definition, but you will see that there are both blue and red text here. And that indicates some changes that were made from the time that we first went out to public comment on these regulations in 2021. Those regulations we didn't go forward and promulgate those regs. Instead, we made some revisions and have gone back out to public comment. So that, I believe, is the purpose of the red and blue text, right, Beth?
It is.
And then, but however, this whole definition that you'll see is non-essential outdoor water use is a new definition, and it's for the purpose of trying to, as we mentioned, regulate, registration, impose a condition on registration to conserve during times of drought, except for those uses that are named as non-essential water use. And while we're on this slide, I want you to note provision F, the one that says for irrigation of public parks and public recreation fields. The department has put up a notice to reviewers which asks specifically for comment about that. There are some environmental justice equity issues surrounding not watering or maintaining public spaces. There are some considerable expenses by municipalities about non-essential water. About irrigation of public parks and so forth. And we've come to learn that there have also been some places like municipally owned, water parks. And I don't mean big water slides and things like that. I mean, just small entities where people may go and cool off, under a fountain-like circumstance. And so we're interested in whether this particular provision, how municipalities and others feel about this particular provision about irrigation of public parks and public recreation fields being identified as a non-essential water use. Recreation, ball fields, I know in every municipality are something that for which there's great expense by the municipality, and the maintenance of them is something that's, been expressed to us as being important to those municipalities. All right, so having said that, we're going to move along, and you're now seeing the golf slide, right?
Yep.
Okay, good, thanks. So I'm not going to go into the level of detail that the A team would, which is Dwayne Levangie knows this stuff, the ins and outs in a miraculous way. And Beth's on the A team, but I just wanted to note for you that the Goff conditions really are identifying as the T's and greens as 100% essential use. Okay, and that then there would need to be reductions at the various drought levels for fairways and roughs. We also identify their landscaping and ornamentals as essential to their core business. And that's because many of these venues use those types of facilities as for photographic sessions, for weddings and things of that kind, that if their landscaping is not maintained, would detract and potentially damage their core business. So, okay, so alternative restrictions criteria. We do have a provision that would have a public water supply system that was registered only and supplied entirely by surface water reservoirs that could maintain drought storage during a multi-year drought. Now, some of you may know that the drought of record is the 1960s that occurred from about 62 to 67 or 60 to 65, somewhere roughly in those timeframes, depending upon different parts of the state. It was a drought of record, and the definition that we've said is that not less than 3 times the sum of the registered volume plus any required releases would be necessary, and it only applies to active water supply reservoirs that do not need further Mass DEP approval for use. So this provision, is one that some surface water suppliers are interested in commenting about that particular definition of what would be exempted from the restrictions because they have multi-year drought storage.
Well, and I'm sorry, but they wouldn't be exempted, but because they have drought storage and don't impact resources as immediately as groundwater withdrawals, they would be able to craft their own cutbacks based on specific environmental triggers and reservoir triggers. It's not an exemption, it's an alternative path to get to cutbacks during drought.
Thank you, Beth. Yes, thank you for correcting me and for clarifying that. This gives you some idea of the group that we're talking about. So the cities, towns that you see in blue here are those that are registered only. So currently these registered only sources do not have any, do not have any kind of requirement for for curbing non-essential outdoor water use during times of drought. And this is kind of the target group. Those shown in gray are permitted. They already have some provisions in their permits regarding, cutbacks on non-essential water use. And then there's some other categories here. And we want to call attention to those that are shown in yellow, since I mentioned Beth and I talked about the multi-year drought storage, that the yellow dots represent those that are registered only public water suppliers that rely only on surface water. In other words, they have no groundwater sources. Okay.
I would also point out that having 3 years worth of your registered volume in storage that's a gigantic reservoir. We don't know exactly who would qualify for this at this point, but we don't think very many will. So most of those would not be eligible for the alternative path. This compares permitted summertime restrictions with what we're proposing for the registrants. The proposal for registrants is there on the bottom. You saw that earlier, and up on the top, it shows that Permittees can choose to restrict their outdoor water use either based on the calendar from May 1st to September 30th. And if they have tight systems and their per capita use is low, the restrictions are very light. If they have higher per capita water use, we require that they cut back to 2 days or 1 day a week, depending on the low flow trigger. Or they can wait until the stream flows start to fall later on in the summer, and they can restrict things that way, and then they're the same restrictions. A lot of suppliers do use the calendar, and they just put restrictions in place on May 1st and let them run till May 30th because it's so much easier to administer. Some prefer to wait until stream flow starts to fall, so they're not telling people you can't water your grass as it's raining outside. And a lot of them will, once the flow begins to fall early in the summer, they'll put the restrictions on and then leave them till the end of the year. And that's how it works for permittees. And then just for registrants, we would be requiring 1 day a week when a drought is first declared, and then becoming more restrictive as drought increases. But droughts are much less common than your average summer stream flow fall levels.
Beth, I'm going to advance the slide. Could you excuse me for one moment? We lost our heat in the house last night, and my plumber may be here. I was hearing car doors, and they were trying to call me a moment ago. So, Beth, if you could take the next slide, I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay.
Go get heat.
See the permit expiration, right? Be right back.
Okay, the permit expiration dates, Leland was talking about this earlier. It is completely unrelated to the idea of restricting water use during drought. This is essentially a housekeeping change to our regulations that we had to make. The Water Management Act requires that permits be issued on a 20-year cycle. In the past 15 years, we've had 2 extraordinary events. The first was the financial meltdown of 2008, and the governor declared that all state permits were going to be extended during that financial meltdown. The idea being that they didn't want people who had permits in place but couldn't do the projects because the financial system was so gummed up. They didn't want them to be hurt by that. And we got extended also by 4 years. And then the COVID the COVID emergency order extended all permits by about 400 days. So we're just incorporating those new extended dates into our regulations, and they'll be extended in perpetuity into the water management schedule.
Right, and then we've successfully reached the slide that tells you what the question that Sam was asking, which is, our public comment period now closes on November 18th. Here's where you can locate these regulations at this link. We are considering any of the comments that were previously filed July 21st when we had published a prior version of these regs. Those comments are being considered. You don't have to resubmit them, but you can if you wish. You'll see here the manager of the program, Dwayne Levangi's contact info. Beth and I are also available if you have questions or need to reach us. And that ends the presentation. So I wanted to just take a few minutes to see if anyone had questions or follow-up topics on this issue.
I guess my question is, when did, assuming you get through the all the comments and resolve them, when do you anticipate this would take effect?
Yeah, so this is on an accelerated track because the registrations are all expiring in April of next year, right? That's right, Beth. And so in order to, promulgate the regulations, review the comments, promulgate the regs, and amend all of these registrations, all 750 odd of them, I think it is. We need a little time to do that because they expire in April. So this is an accelerated review for us. And the extension of the comment period to November 18th makes that review period even tighter. Of course, we also have a change of administration coming and holidays and things like that. So
we have a proposed schedule. We hope to have these promulgated right around the first of the year.
Yeah, could you talk a little about enforcement? So if I was a DPW director in a permitted community with you know, how would DEP, what's the enforcement measures from DEP? And then what should a DPW director or a town official be doing in terms of enforcement for these people who are, utilizing water when they shouldn't be during drought conditions?
Yeah, so you're dug in a layer, a deeper layer here. So let me try and speak to that. So the permits require that the municipality have a bylaw, regulations and bylaw that give them the authority to govern non-essential, that give them the authority to require conservation. Did I get that right, Beth?
Yeah, the permits in this registration amendment don't confer the authority to enforce, but these regulations do have a provision that will require registrants to adopt any authority they need within 24 months. And we get the 24 months. Some people feel that's way too much time, but particularly for towns that have to go to town meeting, get it onto the warrant, get it voted on, get people to agree, and then get it approved by the Attorney General's office. 2 years can be a pretty tight schedule. So they will be required to adopt that authority. If, our enforcement is, they report to us annually if we begin to see that there's a problem, or if if they're having trouble and they come to us saying we can't do this, we are always more than happy to work with communities, and we do that to try and figure out the best way to move forward. And then if they're completely scofflaws and that comes to our attention through the reporting process, DEP has enforcement provisions. We can issue them a notice of non-compliance. We can get into administrative consent orders. And that's the typical way that DEP enforces all of our provisions, and that's what we do with the water management program as well.
Thank
do
you.
you have more to say on that?
Yeah, no, well, just that, municipalities don't have to have a Water Management Act permit to have water use restrictions, but they do typically need to have in place a bylaw and regulation about their imposition of conservation restrictions. Many towns, mine, for example, has been imposing water use restrictions. We do have a permit, but been imposing water use restrictions for decades. It's old hat to most of us, who've lived here a long time. But this is a new provision for registrants, and one of the comments that we're seeing quite a bit is the potential for impact on, on water supply department's revenue.
So towns may have to update their bylaws to comply with the regulations. Okay, thank you.
Or adopt one for those, we saw that map with the communities that were registered only, and that's this regulation is targeted at those communities. So those registrants, registered only communities, may not have a bylaw in place at the current time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Mark?
I think you answered a lot of what I was going to ask, because from the town standpoint, like you said, you're talking about, the registrants here, which, are the big water users that are using, as you said, over 100,000 gallons per day. Do a lot of nurseries fit into that category too? Or, is that really small potatoes, really, quite frankly? I know if you had, many acres,
we do have a few regulated nurseries, but their water use is core to the function of their business.
Right.
And so typically they would not be impacted by these regulations.
Right. And also with, non-essential uses, I think that was a good point you brought up about, what do you call it, public recreation fields, because, a lot of, I'm sure every town, has ball fields and everything like that, are used during the summer. And is that really non-essential use? In some cases, it's not as important, for certain fields, but others, it may be. I don't know. I'd be curious to ask our, parks superintendent, to get some feedback. But again, it comes down to what you're saying, though, is the town is the registrant. It's up to the town to sort of regulate, these situations for the most part, right? I mean, and adopt bylaws where necessary.
Yeah, I mean, they'll want to be in compliance with what they're required to do under the Water Management Act. But yeah, and yeah, if you have some thoughts on the parks and ball fields, please, feel free to send us a public comment. But we've included them as essentially an essential use because it's a huge investment for communities if they need to reseed and resod their parks after a year. There are some health and safety issues, particularly on playing fields. If you're running around on a stony, dusty, playing soccer or baseball or whatever, it's more likely you are more likely to be injured. And then in urban areas, and many registered only systems are urban areas and older areas, we feel there's an environmental justice aspect of, during really hot times, there are people who live in urban areas who don't have access to the outdoors except in parks and splash pads and all those sorts of things. And so that's why we are considering exempting them from these requirements.
Thank you.
On the other hand, other people say, well, municipal areas should be leading by example. So, and that really is a non-essential use. So there are two sides to the coin, and we're interested in hearing what people have to say about it.
I think I can say, having worked in Bourne, those splash pads can use a lot of water in the summer.
Yeah, but on a hot summer day, you really want to take your kids.
Okay, are there other questions or comments?
Well, we want to thank you all for the presentation and being here.
Yes.
Coming out early.
You're very welcome.
You did better than we did. So,
That's for sure.
so Elizabeth, do you have anything else?
No, other than I will be putting this on our website too.
Yeah.
And Sam, you mentioned that some farmer meetings, that some of those are on the BBAC website as well.
And if I know that some of your membership represents, municipalities, because as I said, I spoke to you guys a few weeks ago. And so those folks may want to call this to the attention of their, of their public water supply system or their town leadership, and just to make sure that they are aware of it. So even though we didn't catch you in the sort of the net of those we invited to the public hearings previously, I'm glad we got a chance to, have this conversation and make you aware of it. And the further detail of it can be found on our website. So
Yeah, and this will all be going out to the link to this will be going out to all of those municipalities and encouraging the water departments. From what I'm hearing from Vinny, who's in the Tri-Town Water, apparently they're having union negotiations right now. So that's why he couldn't be here and probably.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that Elizabeth will send out a notice to all the members with a link to this so that they're aware of it.
okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all again.
For your
Okay.
time, I appreciate
Thank you.
it.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Bye
Okay,
now.
so
Care.
BBAC